Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be with you this morning. Hope the things we have to talk about will help to build you up in the faith, will help to build your confidence in the faith, and will provide some things that will help you in your daily walk with the Lord. Before we get started into our main study this moment, I wanted to take a moment to share a piece of art with you. This is a sculpture made by the artist and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle named Michelangelo. This sculpture is known as the Pietà. That means the woman of pity. It's a depiction of Mary holding the corpse of the crucified Jesus. Now, I don't share this with you. A lot of people look at this as a way to venerate Mary. I believe Mary is a great hero of faith as a mother. I believe she was a human person. So I don't share this with you to venerate her in any way, but I think this particular piece of art encapsulates some really neat concepts for us to think about. And I just want to share this with you just for a moment, and then we'll get into our study. An interpretation of this that I've heard that I really like is, as she's holding her son, mourning his death, she's also holding him forward as if he's a sacrifice to the world. Her job, the task she was given by the Lord, was to be a mother to the Messiah, to the Savior. That meant, through her life, she gave up her body. She gave up her sleep, her peace of mind, worrying about this child every minute. And I know that every piece of her soul wanted to keep him held close to her heart. And I know that's true for every mother here with their child today. That from the day that, even before they're born, you give your body to them, your peace of mind, your sleep, every ounce of energy you have to hold this child close and to nurture them, knowing that one day you are going to have to sacrifice them to the world. Now, you know very well that your child is not Jesus, but one day you're going to have to turn them loose, and that's a sacrifice every mother has to make. So thank you to the mothers this morning for what you do. To the young people here, think about your mother in this light, that every piece of her soul still sees you as that little newborn child and wants to hold you close. So happy Mother's Day to the mothers. You mean a lot to your children. I know you do. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Our study this morning, evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's a very unique thing about Christianity as opposed to most other religions, and it is the fact that our religion, from start to finish, has one piece of information, one historical event, that if you were to remove that piece, the entire thing from beginning to end would crumble. Look with me at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 14 through 20. Paul writes here, and he's been writing about the death, burial, and resurrection, the gospel. And he says, "And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified about God that He raised Christ, whom He did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. The entirety of your faith hinges on this one historical event." Now, we talk about the death of Christ quite often. We've sang about it this morning. We've learned about it at the table. And oftentimes we talk about the resurrection too, and we talk often about the theology involved in there and what that resurrection means for us. And that's good, and we should do that. But this is an actual historical event. And if we don't believe that this is an actual historical event that literally happened, all the rest of that, he says, it's futile. It's worthless. It's a waste of time if you were to remove the resurrection of Christ. I think that even goes back into the Old Testament. You know what? Who cares if they crossed the Red Sea if that wasn't leading to the Messiah coming and being raised from the dead? Who cares? Who cares if the law was given? The law's meaningless if Christ didn't come to fulfill it and complete that work with his resurrection. The whole thing from beginning to end is a waste of time. It's pointless if the resurrection did not literally happen in history. So it's worth our time, worth our faith this morning to examine some evidences that will help build our confidence in the fact that this historically did happen. There's a lot of Christian groups today that still call themselves Christian, but they start to view this, it's like a mythology, kind of like a symbolic sacrifice or a symbolic resurrection. And they try to keep the teaching or the theology, but deny the thing actually happened. And that's contrary to what's being taught here. If the thing did not actually happen, then it's meaningless. All the theology involved in there means nothing. The symbolism is worthless. The teachings that Christ gave for how you should live your life, they have no teeth. What good is that? It all hinges on this one historical fact. I don't know if you've ever played the game Jenga, where you build up the blocks and you take turns pulling them out. This is the one that if you pull it out, the entire tower crumbles. So this morning it is worth our time to examine some evidence that this event, this resurrection of Christ actually happened. I've got a couple of quotes from some well-known skeptics here, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but these help present some concepts that I think we'll be able to address this morning. Here's what Richard Dawkins says in 2006. Presumably what happened to Jesus was what happens to all of us when we die. We decompose. Accounts of Jesus' resurrection and ascension are about as well documented as Jack and the Beanstalk. So that's his claim, that the account of the resurrection is as well documented. And I know he's being hyperbolic. That's kind of his shtick, is to be hyperbolic about that. So this morning we want to ask the question, how well documented is this resurrection? Is there enough for us to be able to put our confidence in it? Remember, our entire faith is built off of this. This is an older quote from about 1748 from a man named David Hume, a very famous Christian skeptic. He says, "When anyone tells me that he saw a dead man restored to life, I immediately consider with myself whether it be more probable that this person should either deceive or be deceived, or the fact which he relates should really have happened. I weigh the one miracle against the other, and according to the superiority which I discover, I pronounce my decision and always reject the greater miracle." So for him, for something miraculous to happen, to believe that it did happen, it must be more likely that he kind of says it a little backwards here, but it has to be more miraculous, more fanciful, that the people just didn't make it up, is basically what he's saying. So are they right? Is it worth our time to put our confidence, to devote our life to this one historical event? As we examine evidences, wouldn't it be nice if we just had this one item, one or two items we could point to, like an artifact? Indiana Jones out there digs it up out of a cave and we're like, this is it. Irrefutable proof, this object. And there's a couple of things being discussed about today. This is what's known as the Shroud of Turin. People suppose that it is the burial cloth that was around Jesus. And you know what? There's evidence that they've examined that suggests that maybe it is. There's evidence that suggests that maybe it's a forgery from about the year 1300. And honestly, if I give you my opinion, I kind of lean towards it being genuine, but I'm like at 51%. Is that enough for me to devote my whole life to it? No. We don't know. If they came out and said, yeah, that we've figured out this actually is a forgery, well, it wouldn't be that much of a surprise. So I don't think this is an artifact we can really rely on. Maybe one day there'll be more known about this. But for now, it doesn't really prove much. I don't have a picture of it up here, but you can go to, across the Atlantic Ocean, you can go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they have what they believe is the actual tomb of Christ. And I think it was 2016, they actually did some renovations on it and did some restoration on it. And sure enough, when they opened it up, there was no body in there. However, there's still open questions as to whether that really is or not. Honestly, I lean towards it being the legitimate tomb that Jesus was buried in. We don't know. There's enough questions the other way. That's not enough for us to put our faith in. It would be so nice if we had something like that, though, wouldn't it? You know, maybe if we go inside the tomb, there was an inscription that says, Jesus was here, gotcha or something, I don't know. We don't have that. So how can we be confident enough that this event literally happened? Or is it like Richard Dawkins says, as well documented as Jack and the Beanstalk? Here's the reality. Jesus actually did leave us the best evidence possible, even better than if we had some object or relic or something like that. Here's what this was our text this morning. Here's the evidence that Jesus told us that he's leaving behind. This is in Acts chapter 1, verses 7 through 8. He's about to ascend into heaven. As we read about earlier, it says he showed himself with them with many proofs. So he did all sorts of demonstrations that it was really him, and he was really there, and he was really raised from the dead. And here's what he said. He said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses to the end of the earth." So Jesus himself actually did leave some extremely convincing evidence that we'll look at this morning. And that evidence was that these people were designated to be his witnesses to the end of the earth. Now, to us, witness testimony can seem like something kind of spurious, right? People can lie. People do lie all the time. People can make things up. People can be mistaken. Sometimes we see things and, it didn't really happen quite the way we see. However, you got to think Jesus is leaving behind the best possible evidence that could be. So I want to take a few moments this morning and examine this idea of what it means to be a witness. Since we're discussing this as a historical event, I think it behooves us this morning, we're going to be historians. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of how they examine these ancient documents from millennia ago, but it'll be someone kind of in a clean room because they don't want to damage the ancient scrolls, and they'll be wearing their white cloth gloves so they don't damage the things as they touch them. So this morning, I would invite you to put on your imaginary cloth gloves, and we're going to examine some of these and put together. What we're going to prove this morning is that Richard Dawkins is incorrect. This is one of the most, if not the most, well-documented ancient historical events that happened. And because of that, it is absolutely entirely reasonable for you to place the entirety of your faith in this historical event. And then everything else that it means will flow from that. What we're going to look at is the idea of early eyewitness reliability. How reliable were these eyewitnesses? And we're going to look at three concepts. We're going to look at the earliness of that witness, right? We assume that the closer a witness is to the actual event, the more credible they probably are. Memory can change over time. The consistency of the witness. How did their story change over time? Were there, other people saying something kind of different, and things slowly morphed over time? And that's a belief that people have out there. And then we're going to look at the persistence of the witness. How sure were these people? How certain were they that they saw what they saw? And I think if we take these three concepts and put them together, we will be able to establish that the reliability of their witness, of their testimony, is extremely sure. And that Jesus made the right choice in leaving them behind as evidence of his resurrection. So first, let's talk about the earliness of the witness. How soon after the actual event was this witness being? And what I want to do is we're going to have a couple of historical examples to set up a perspective here. We're going to show through our argumentation, we tend to believe this, the earlier the eyewitness, the more credibility they have. If someone's a witness to a crime, then they need to be able to give testimony about that, or file their reports soon after. I work at a bank, and so we have to go through training all the time about, if somebody robs the bank, and I work from home, so I guess that isn't always relevant, but I still have to go through the training. I don't think the bank robber is going to come to my house, but I still have to go through the training. And so, if you're the bank teller and the bank robber comes in, the thing they teach you is don't go talk about this with other people immediately, because that can mix you up on some of the details. You need to kind of keep your story to yourself, and as soon as you can, write down the details you remember. Because our memories can change things over time. Different perspectives can kind of flood in. They say hindsight is 20/20, and the reason that is because we can get a bigger perspective of things over time. But sometimes, with our faulty minds, that can lead to details changing or certain things. So we generally believe the earlier the eyewitness, the more credibility they have. So as being historians this morning, all of us, let's examine a few historical cases, and then we're going to compare the eyewitness of the resurrection to that and see how it stacks up with the documentation of certain historical events. I'm going to ask Silas to come up here. He's going to help me with a demonstration that will help illustrate some of these things this morning. Now go ahead and stand, I guess, right here, and you'll see what we're doing here in a moment. Let's talk about Alexander the Great. Nobody disputes that Alexander the Great lived, and there's very little disagreement about what Alexander the Great accomplished in his lifetime. Nobody disputes this. Alexander the Great lived from about 356 to 323 BC, so he died at a fairly young age. The earliest writing that we have in our possession about Alexander the Great is by a historian named Diodorus Siculus, and he writes in the Bibliotheca Historica in about the 1st century BC. Now, there are references he makes to sources earlier than this, but this is the earliest writing we have about Alexander the Great. That's 300 years after he lived. So what we're going to do up here, and Silas is helping me with this, is we're going to set up a timeline. And Silas is going to stand right here. This is when Alexander the Great lived. And I'm using Silas. He's going to be a great anchor point. He's a football player and he just got inducted into the 1100 club at school. And what that means is, as a power lifter, his 3 different lifts that he did, the weights all add up to over 1,100 pounds. So he's a solid dude right here. He's going to be our anchor point. This is year 0 on our timeline. This is when Alexander the Great lived and did the things that he did. And I'll be our moving point here. And so Alexander the Great, I don't have this mapped out exactly to scale, but let's just say about right here is 300 years. The earliest writing that we have in our possession about Alexander the Great is about this far away on the timeline. That's pretty normal for ancient historical sources, believe it or not. This is just an example I have here. So about 300 years. To give another example of how this kind of historical dating works, Tiberius Caesar. He was the Caesar that was reigning during Christ's life. The reigning Caesar during the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. He lived from about 42 BC to 37 AD. The earliest writings we have about Tiberius Caesar are from the historian Tacitus, and he writes in the Annals in 120 AD. So this is a distance of plus 80 years. So starting from our solid dude here, that's year 0. The earliest source we have about him is probably, maybe, if that was 300, that's maybe about right here. Not to scale, I guess, but close enough. So the earliest witness we have about Tiberius Caesar is this far away. That's pretty good for a historical source. If you start examining other historical figures and the time they were written about, the distances get way bigger than this. There's a lot more examples. This is actually, for ancient historical writings, a really good distance. So what about the witness of the resurrection? Remember, we're examining this from a historical perspective here. Well, okay, so this is plus 80. John writes in 95 AD. So that's plus 65. And this is, John's writings are the latest of the biblical. So guess what? We're going to be getting closer. The book of Acts is believed to be written probably around the year 85. So if we take the resurrection happening in AD 30 to 33, that's a difference of about 55 years. The book of Acts. We've read about the resurrection in Acts this morning, right? Jesus presented himself with many proofs to these people and said, "You'll be my witness." And Luke writes about that in the book of Acts in about 85 AD, plus 55. We're already getting in a territory that is unheard of for historical sources. It's believed the Gospel of Matthew, which tells about the resurrection from an eyewitness perspective, was written in about 80 AD, so a difference of 50 years. The Gospel of Mark is believed to be written about the year 70 AD. That's where the ladies find the empty tomb. It tells about the resurrection from an eyewitness perspective. That's about plus 40. In 1 Corinthians 15, which we read from this morning, that was believed to be written about 55 AD. So plus 25, we read about the resurrection. In fact, at that plus 25, that's the point he's saying this is the linchpin to your entire faith. Everything is based off of this one fact. In Galatians, we'll have some verses from Galatians here in a few moments that we'll read. It's believed to be written about AD 45, so plus 15. I don't know if you can tell there's a problem coming up. In Galatians 1:1, Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. So 15 years after the resurrection, Paul is writing that God raised Jesus from the dead. That resurrection actually happened. Why would we question that? We're talking about historical sources that are written 300 years after the fact, and they're taken as fact, without question. Here we have eyewitness 15 years after the fact. Off the charts for historical sources. And they're saying is as well documented as Jack and the Beanstalk. And this isn't even just getting into the theological material here. Just looking at the scriptures with our cloth gloves as historians, just when was the thing written? And, you know, what does it say about that? Just establishing a timeline. Look with me in 1 Corinthians, if we back up a few verses. He says, "For I deliver to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the disciples." What's interesting about this is Paul writing. He says, "I deliver to you as of first importance what I also received." So Paul, writing as a witness, is saying, you know what? You guys have already been telling me about this. I'm passing on this information. This is information that I've also received from others. You guys have already been talking about this entire time. What's interesting about this passage is this is known as probably the first Christian creed. And by creed, we mean it's like a saying that they would say. So, you know, think of it like a poem or a song or just a series of words. This thing that Paul received was a known saying at the time, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. You see how there's like a rhythm to it. This is a known saying that has been given to Paul. It's believed that this was written probably within a year of the actual resurrection when people started saying this creed and passing it on. So guess what? A year later, and we already have people, and that's just from looking at a historical perspective without actually getting into the actual material that these folks are saying about it. Just the earliness of their witness. We don't have anything like that historically. We barely have anything like that today. How many times does a court case call up witnesses and it's, you know, a year after the fact? We can trust that the witnesses here are reliable based on the fact of how quickly after this happened that they started. This wasn't a later invention that just kind of slowly more. You can go sit down now. I told him that he had the option of making a dramatic, fall just to drive the point home, but I think That wouldn't be a good look for someone in the 1,100-pound club. Just from the earliness of the witnesses, that's unheard of historically. It's barely heard of in our day. There's an idea out there that, Jesus was, he was a good teacher, and over time, Christians just kind of made a mythology out of it, and it just kind of slowly morphed into this. Well, we have, within 1 to 5 years, this creedal saying, no, he died, he was buried, and he was resurrected. So the earliness of witness is extremely reliable and unlike anything else we have in ancient history. Completely unlike it. There's a common objection. People say, yeah, but there's miracles. Well, first of all, miracles are extremely common to all ancient history. I can't remember what they are specifically, but when they wrote about Alexander the Great, that contained some miraculous things too. And nobody's sitting there questioning, the things that they may not believe the miracles, but it's actually a very common thing. That's what we would expect to see from actual ancient documents. However, miracles are recorded in the Bible because they are so unusual. We tend to open the scripture and we read miracle, 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 but that's not how it happened. Most people didn't ever see a miracle. It makes sense that if you saw a guy resurrected, you would want to write that down, right? That's not something we see every day. So the idea that the resurrection can't be real because resurrections can't happen, we look around and we don't see people resurrected now, so obviously it couldn't have happened then. That's circular logic. It can't have happened because they don't happen. It could be that they wrote about it because they saw it, and that was a remarkable thing, the most remarkable thing they've ever seen. So let's talk about the consistency of the witness left behind. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 5 through 7. Back to this creedal saying that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, the Apostle Peter, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles. So what Paul is basically writing here is we have this event, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And if you don't believe me, you can go ask these people. Because we're only a few years out from the actual thing, right? And he says you can talk to Peter, the 12, 500 brothers. He said most of these people are still alive. You can go ask them. So Paul isn't just making up this story and be like, don't go checking this with the others. They may say something different. He's saying, please, go ask them. They're still over there, such and such congregation. You can go talk to them. They saw it with their own eyes. Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel, what was preached to me, is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. So Paul is we're not going to call Silas back up here, but Paul's going to kind of set up his own timeline here. And he's going from the moment of his own conversion. He's on the road to Damascus, and Christ appears to him, and he sees the glory, and it blinds him, and then he goes on into town and then is baptized. So that's the time. Paul is kind of setting up his own timeline. And he starts off here with the fact that he received the gospel. It's not man's gospel. The people didn't make this up. The witnesses didn't make it up. He said he received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. And so what happened next? Skip over to verse 16. So after his conversion, he says, I did not immediately consult with anyone. So he's like the bank teller with the robber, right? He didn't start sharing his story, his witness with all the other people and that get tainted. He says, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother, and what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. So Paul, talking about his own history as a Christian here, he receives the gospel message from Jesus Christ. That's the resurrection, right? He says, I didn't get with everyone and get the story straight. He says, I went up to Jerusalem, or I didn't go up to Jerusalem. He said, I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. So he was there for for 3 years, he says. So I went away on my own for 3 years. After 3 years, I go back and I visit Peter for 15 days. So now, after 3 years, he's going to go check his story with Peter. It's interesting, this word visit here. You know, I read this and the first thing that comes to mind, well, it's like, well, he didn't really know Peter at this time. And the word visit, the way we use it, it's like you're visiting relatives, you know, you're going to go have tea with them or something. This word is actually, I can't remember, the Greek word is like histori, from where we get the word history. And from what I understand, I'm not a Greek scholar, but from what I understand, that word actually carries with it, this isn't just a social visit. He's more of a live news reporter here, reporting on the story. So his visit to Peter wasn't just a social call. He was going to make sure his story was still straight. Think of him on the Eyewitness News Channel 9 or whatever with his microphone. Peter, this is what we're being told happened. Is that what really happened? And Peter says, yes, your story's right. I was with him for 15 days. And that's just with Peter. So we know Paul, in preaching this message, Paul didn't come up with it on his own, right? We have a corroborating witness here that Paul didn't make up this message of the resurrection. He's checked it with Peter. There's a consistent message here after time. So Paul confirms the gospel with Peter and then with James, who were both eyewitnesses. Galatians chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain. So what does Paul do after 14? Paul has now been teaching and establishing churches and preaching to the Gentiles for 14 years after his visit with Peter. So what does he do? 14 years later, he goes back. And he says, you know what, this time, I really want to make sure that I'm on the right track. My story hasn't changed. The thing I'm preaching is really the thing that was seen, that the eyewitnesses saw. And so 14 years later, we have this message, this witness being consistent. At various intervals, he's checking back in with people. And so this isn't something Paul is making up. This isn't an idea of the resurrection slowly morphing over time. This was true eyewitness reporting the historical facts. And people like Paul coming along as a witness and checking in his message with the people that saw it. So we know that the witnesses were very consistent. So after 14 years, we see Paul returning and verifies that the message did not change. Next, let's think about the persistence of the witnesses. You know, I showed that Shroud of Turin at the beginning, and I said I'm about 51% on it being legit. That's definitely not enough for me to change anything about my life. You know what? I really believe the Thunder are going to win the national championship this year, but I'm not going to put any money on it. I'm not going to. I think it will happen. I believe it will. Maybe I'm 51% on that. I don't know. I'm not very persistent about those things, right? How persistent were these early witnesses? How far were they willing to go to hold the line to say, this is what we really saw? Not just what we believe, but what we saw with our own eyes. Let's give an example. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about, he lists James. James is one of those people you can go check this story with. James is a witness. Go. If you don't believe me, go check with James. There's an interesting trajectory with James. Mark 3:21, talking about Jesus. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he is out of his mind. John 7, verses 3 through 5. So his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For not even his brothers believed in him. Now these passages don't call out James specifically, but I think this did include James. Not even Jesus' own brothers believed him. they had a lot of doubts. And, maybe that's just an older sibling thing. There's or I guess they were younger sibling, a sibling thing. That's our brother. He's a little out of it, is what they're thinking. They didn't even believe him. But let's look where James, so we have James in the middle of the story. We're going to follow James and see how persistent he was. Galatians 2, verse 9. We've already read part of this, talking about Paul checking in his story. He said, when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived that the grace was given to me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Did you notice what it said about James? We expect this of Cephas or Peter. We expect this of Cephas and John, pillars in the church. These are leaders. They are like the lead apostles even. These are the men that we go to with authority. They know what they're talking about. James, the brother of Jesus, is listed right there with them. Can you believe that? In a few short years, James goes from, that's our brother, he's out of his mind, don't listen to him, to being a pillar in the church, a champion of the resurrection of Christ, somebody like Paul would go to see. Amazing. History tells us that James, under persecution, was pushed off the temple and then stoned over his belief in the resurrection. How does somebody go from that, from I don't believe it at all, to being willing to die for it? Do you think he made it up? People don't usually die for a lie. Maybe sometimes they die for something they're mistaken about. But it wasn't just James. I can't move on from this point without thinking, because our passage in 1 Corinthians 15 mentioned how Christ appeared to James. Could you imagine that conversation? I imagine it's maybe the conversation Christ would have with all of us. Whatever happened there, James was a believer. And he believed in it so diligently that he became a pillar in the church. And he believed in it so diligently that he was willing to die for it. And it wasn't just James, it was Peter, who history tells us was crucified upside down. Andrew, the apostle Andrew, is believed to have been crucified. James, the son of Zebedee, died by the sword. John was believed to be boiled in oil and then exiled. And during his exile, that's when he writes the book of Revelation. Would you be willing to be boiled in oil for 51%? I wouldn't. I'd be like, hang on, let's hedge our bets here. I could be wrong. John says, no, I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. He's an extremely persistent witness. Now, we can go through this whole list of the apostles. I don't even have Stephen up here. Stephen, who is talked about, the first martyr in the book of Acts. As these people are getting together and checking their story, they've already watched somebody whom they loved die for this message, die for this witness. Were they scared? They were fearful at times, but what did it cause them to do? It caused them to double down. All in Acts, we've talked about this in our Acts study, they prayed for boldness, and that boldness was granted to them, that they kept preaching this same message, the resurrection of Christ. I don't think they were making it up. Seems very unlikely. It seems like it would be more of a miracle that they made it up than that they were actually just telling the truth of what they actually saw. These and many others went to their brutal deaths entirely adamant that the resurrection of Jesus happened. They weren't perfect people, but they knew for a fact that the resurrection happened. They knew it. As we close, there's a couple of points I want to leave you with. I hope you will agree with me this morning from the things that we've shown. I know going through historical timelines and stuff can be kind of boring, and hopefully our demonstration here has kind of showed you what we're dealing with here about the reliability of the witness to the resurrection. And if you're like me, you see, I see the wisdom now in Jesus not leaving, some super convincing artifact, but leaving witnesses instead. I think in the end, that's more convincing than some object would ever be. There will always be doubts about the Shroud of Turin. But there's no doubt that these men truly believed what they saw. There's no doubt about that. Can't be denied. Jesus in his wisdom left the best evidence that could be. So a couple of points I want to leave you with this morning. You are going to have to reckon with the reality of the resurrection at some point. Now, maybe you already have, and that's good. But at some point, you're going to have to look at it objectively. Look at the history objectively, and you're going to have to make a decision. I believe this happened. I believe the witnesses are reliable, or not. You know, those who don't want to deal with it, guess what? One day, the one who was resurrected is going to come back, and he's going to be their judge. And they're going to have to reckon with it then. Won't you reckon with it today, please? If you're not a Christian, have full assurance that the resurrection did happen. And that's the door that opens up to the rest of the faith. All the benefits that come with Christianity are through that door. Christ is that door because he was resurrected. And then to Christians this morning, what does your witness say about the resurrection of Christ, the way that you're living? You know, we look back at these ancient people, Peter, Paul, James. They're saying a lot about the resurrection of Christ, aren't they? The fact that they were willing to go to such lengths to defend, yes, this is what I saw. In about 2,000 years from now, when they look back on you, the historians with their cloth gloves, what are they going to say? You know, for me, I bet they'll be like, well, with the way he lived, 51%'s even generous. You know, shame on me for that. Ask yourself that question this morning. Will they look back on your life and say they were willing to give everything for it? To build their entire life and their entire family around this historical fact? Did they really, really believe it? Jesus has showed us this is the best evidence. It's on your shoulders. Are you sharing that witness with other people? Are you in convincing argument that Jesus was truly raised from the dead? Are you living out the teachings that Jesus taught? Are you living as a resurrected person? Romans 6 tells us we put on his death, burial, and resurrection through baptism. Are you living that new life? You know, there's a lot of noise in the world, a lot of alternate theories. There's one, it's, you know, nobody that's truly a scholar takes this serious, but there's a theory out there that the Romans came up with the story as a way to, you know, they say religion's the opiate of the masses, so the Romans kind of came up with this story to give people something to believe, and it was a way of controlling them. And a lot of people don't take that seriously, but it's a theory that's out there. I think the evidence that we see makes that sound kooky. The witnesses really believed what they saw. It's an actual historical event that happened. To take the historicity out of that, the truth out of that, it's like, what is it? I can't remember which one of the Timothys, but he says, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. If Jesus' teachings mean anything, we have to understand that this historical event happened, really happened. With all the noise out there, you know, there's a lot of talk about UFOs and aliens now, and people getting into all this spiritual crystals, and there's a lot of different theories and stuff that's being thrown around these days. And I'll be honest, I mean, I don't really fall for a lot of that stuff, but I think if we're all honest, we have doubts at times, right? I know I have these moments where I'm just like, is this stuff really real? We all have that. To me, these things are like anchor points. And there's certain anchor points that when I start to have those doubts, I think about that and I'm like, well, this is irrefutable. It's undeniable that these people went to their death truly believing that this happened. And it always recenters me and refocuses me. And I hope the things we've talked about this morning do that for you. These, the idea of the timeline and the historical sources, I'll be honest, I didn't come up with this line of argumentation myself. There's a gentleman by the name of Gary Habermas, and he is one of those people that handles the ancient documents with the cloth gloves. And he calls this his minimal facts argument. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to go read about that from him. He goes a bit more into detail about some of these things. But Jesus says he left the witness, and that's for each of us. Their witness is for us. Your witness is for the world. If you need the help of the church this morning, we would ask that you would come forward during our invitation song. We can help you put on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus through baptism. If you haven't been living a life that is a solid testimony to the resurrection of Christ, and you need the prayers or the help of the church with that, we can help you. We can pray for you this morning. Please come forward as we sing the song of invitation.